I want to welcome everybody to this version of the podcast with Larry Lester, Negro Leagues historian and extraordinaire, one of the few people that's been able to keep the Negro League stories alive and well in communities and entrepreneurship and all of these different areas that have allowed him to continue to help keeping these stories at the forefront and also bringing them to light. And his book that we have here is what we're going to go into in depth. So, Larry, thank you for being here, and I appreciate all your knowledge and your wisdom that you're going to bestow upon us today.
Well, thank you, Ethan, and the Cleveland Public Library for having me.
All right, let's get into the beginning. And obviously, one of the most notable players in the Negro Leagues is Satchel Paige. And ironically enough, you lived down the street from him growing up?
In the neighborhood.
In the neighborhood. In the neighborhood. Okay. So, if you was in the neighborhood, knowing his kids, what do you remember most about Satchel, not as a player, but as a person and a neighbor and a man, and maybe even going into some of the stories that you've heard from his family members?
Well, growing up in an all-black neighborhood, going to an all-black school, an all-black church, black people were basically quarantined from the mainstream society. So we all lived in the same community. And so it was not uncommon for us to live next to other ball players besides Satchel Paige. All the musicians, doctors, and lawyers lived in the same neighborhood. And so I grew up knowing Pamela and Shirley and Rita and Linda, his daughters, and his oldest son, Robert, who's about 6'8", looks just like his dad. Great basketball player, but we got along great. We still talk today. I talked to Robert last week, but I never met Satchel Paige because he was always on the road. During the winter months, he was probably playing in Mexico, Puerto Rico, or Dominican Republic, or Cuba. He was a hired gun. He was in very popular demand because of his pitching abilities. Tall, talented, and talkative, and perhaps the greatest pitcher to ever take the mound. But in talking with Pamela, his oldest daughter, who my best friend, she would always say, Dad always called home to check on us. No matter where he was always calling home. So it had this saying back then, you put a nickel in the phone to save your home. Because you wanted to keep in contact with your spouse. And so it worked out. He had 8 kids. His wife, Lahoma, had 1 child when they got married. So they had 9 total children. But they were a very close-knit family. Always fun to be around, and had a lot of stories about their dad's penny-pinching abilities to buy groceries or buy other things. But in the house, there were antiques. He was an antique collector. He was a rifle collector. A very knowledgeable man, despite the public perception of him being more like Stephen Fetching. That was just an act to entertain white folks, that he was just a slow-moving country bumpkin who didn't know what was going on, but he was very educated, self-educated, and a very smart man.
And obviously, growing up around the game, we had this conversation a couple days ago. You started wanting to get into the history of baseball in the mere ages of hitting double digits in age. When you talk about being around the game, did you actually play yourself as well?
Well, yes. I grew five blocks away from Municipal Stadium, so I could hear the crack of the bat, every day when they played. So I played on several little league teams. I played center field, had a pretty decent arm. I was fast, but I could never hit the curveball. So my career was short-lived, but it was a fun time. I love baseball. I went to countless games during the homestand. I might go to 2 or 3 games in a row. It only costs $1.50 to go to the game.
Wow.
And back then, the A's were battling the Washington Senators for last place. So there were always a lot of empty seats, and by the third inning, I could move closer to the action. So it was good. For $1.50, I could watch the game, and another 15 cents, I would buy a scorecard. So I kept score, and that's how I learned math, which later turned into a mathematical IT technical career.
Mm-hmm. And when you talk about getting into the history of the game, when did you find out, obviously after learning that you couldn't hit the curveball, when did you find out that you wanted to do more outside of the game to bring life to it?
Well, in going to the game that was located in an all-black neighborhood, I saw a lot of white fans and mostly white ball players. So I'm curious as to where all these white people are coming from and why are there so many white ball players, because as far as I could walk, I could only see black folks. So I'd come back to the neighborhood and talk to the elders, and they would tell me about ball players who played in a league called the Negro Leagues, Negro National League, Negro American League. And I was just blown away that there was a league of all black men, all black teams for the most part. And so curiosity became my philosophy, and I wanted to find out more about these teams and these men that I've never seen play before. I was just blown away by it. So I started interviewing some of the players in the neighborhood: Connie Johnson, Doc Horn, Lefty Lamarck, Buck O'Neill. They all lived within walking distance. And of course, some of the Kansas City Athletic ball players like Ed Charles and John White, the relief pitcher for the Kansas City Athletics. So they would invite me to their home. They would tell me great baseball stories and give me a glove and a ball to play with. And I just had a good time. But I didn't have the in-depth knowledge that I desired. And so I started looking at black newspapers. Like the first one I looked at, of course, was the Kansas City Call. I started in 1919. So I got the first issue of that newspaper on microfilm and start researching and understanding how the Kansas City Monarchs came into existence, and learned every ball player from 1920 up through 1955. That was the last year the Monarchs were in Kansas City. So it was a wonderful journey. Curiosity became my philosophy. I wanted to know more and more and more about these ball players. And so in the process, I started reading all the different black newspapers across the country. Chicago Defender, Pittsburgh Courier, New York Amsterdam News, Philadelphia Tribune, the New York Age, Michigan Chronicle, St. Louis Argus. In the process, I read more than 400 different black newspapers over the next 30, 35 years, compiling editorials, box scores, and mining data from these black newspapers. All that information was right there for a dime a copy. So it was a great experience, and it was beautiful. I mean, people say it takes money to research, but a library card is free.
I think that's important, especially as we are sitting in the Cleveland Public Library.
Yes.
I think that's a great notion. And obviously, getting into more recent history in the light of events earlier this year with the attempted removal of Jackie Robinson's Army history from the Department of Defense, how important is that we recall the history of not only the most important athletes in black baseball, but also their humanity and what they did outside the sport?
Well, we will never forget what Jackie Robinson and Jack Johnson and Muhammad Ali and Colin Kaepernick did. This current administration has weaponized the words diversity and woke, but I will say I would rather be awoke than sleep. I want to know what's going on, and there's nothing wrong with diversity. the problem I think the current administration has is because they know diversity creates competition. Competition eliminates mediocrity. And to some people, equality can seem like oppression because now they have to compete with people from other nationalities and races. I mean, roughly 28% of the ball players that play today were not born in this country. And they're being represented by 16 different countries. So more than a quarter of the ball players are not native born. And in the process, they have made the game faster, stronger, and more athletic because we're getting the best ball players on the planet, not just the best ball players in America. And that's why the game is just on fire and more entertaining to watch.
Yeah, and you get into the faster, the better of ball players, and that kind of gets into this book and getting into the nuances of the players that were left untold or left unheard of. And you brought that to life in this book about the East-West game, and I want to get into that because we talk about the East-West All-Star game that's dated back to 1933 and how important that was not only for black baseball, but for the communities around it as well. How did it become such a monumental event for Black America beyond being a baseball game dating back to 1933 up until it finally finished up and was removed?
Well, we have to go back a few years earlier. From 1928 to 1941, there was no Negro World Series played. And the main cause was in 1929, we had the Great Depression that lasted until about 1932. So here we are, this country in 1933, we need to kind of reboot. We need to try to re-energize the economic and social landscape of America. And so Arch Ward of the Chicago Tribune created this white all-star game for Major League Baseball. And along comes John Clark from the Pittsburgh Courier, who says we can do the same thing in the black leagues. So 1933 is this country's trying to recover from the Great Depression. And so this is perfect timing, and it's bringing the best ball players from east of the Mississippi against the best ball players from west of the Mississippi. And that's why it's called the East-West All-Star Game. Played annually at Comiskey Park in Chicago. Tremendous attendance. In 1941 and 43, they had over 50,000 people at this game. The East-West All-Star Game outdrew the white Major League All-Star Games. And some people say that was eye-opening for white Major League owners because they're saying, we're missing a revenue stream here.
Right.
There's money to be made if we can get these ball players onto our clubs. And so the East-West game was just different. It was people who wanted to be there. All the entertainers and celebrities wanted to be there, from Teddy Horn, great trumpeter, Lena Horne's father, and Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Louis Armstrong, and of course Lionel Hampton. And Joe Louis was always there. Sometimes he would throw out the first pitch. So anybody who was anybody wanted to be at the East-West All-Star Game. So people would get there early, a couple of days before the game, and party and go shopping. Women would buy high-fashion clothing and midi-length dresses down to the mid-calf with wide yoke collars and great big wide belts with puffy sleeves, and they put on a big floppy hat or beret, and sometimes a little fur around the collar, and the men would likewise dress up in three-piece suits or dress up like the Great Gatsby and have a fedora or a white straw hat and have some Stetson or flush Forshan shoes. Everybody was dressed to the nines
Right.
just to go to a baseball game. And that's what made it such a gala affair. So in my opinion, in the 30s, the East-West game was the Masters Golf Tournament, the Olympics, the Final Four, the World Series, the Kentucky Derby, all rolled into one.
Right. And I want to get into that fashion point that you made because of the importance of black folk feeling like they could, should, and would wear their best attire because it was representation of, oh, y'all think we might dress some kind of way, but we dress better than you when we really want to, or we can. How important was that for black people and players to be able to have that freedom to dress however they wanted to and to just showcase themselves in their dress, in their fashion?
Well, dressing fashionably is a sense of pride. Many black Americans at that time had blue-collar jobs, jobs where you get your hands dirty, and this was the opportunity to kind of show out.
Right.
And show up and show out, as they would say. And so it gave them a sense of pride, and it also generated a lot of income within the black community because the women had to get their hair done, their nails done, men had to get haircuts, some of them had to buy new suits for a variety of reasons. May not own one.
Right.
But if you go into this East-West Classic, as they called it, you wanted to look your best. Because you might be in the newspaper the next day. Yeah, plenty of photography. So it was a sense of pride.
And obviously, we talked about some of the people behind the scenes that play a big part. One of the biggest contributors and players is also Gus Greenlee, who has been in this entire sphere as a black owner and all these things. Giving black fans the right to vote for the All-Star selection, even though they did not have that right politically around the sphere of the United States. How significant was that for them to understand that they had that power?
Well, it gave black Americans a great pride in knowing that their vote counted. They could see the vote results in the Chicago Defender and Pittsburgh Courier. But you have to put this in the context of America. When the founding fathers wrote the Constitution, they did not give their spouses the right to vote.
Right.
So black men got the right to vote with the 15th Amendment, and basically white women got the right to vote with the 19th Amendment in 1920. And so through state and local restriction and laws, many black people could not vote until the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Right.
Some of they had grandfathered some laws in that restricted voting among black men and black women. They had a literacy test that nobody could pass. I have copies of those tests. I still don't know how many bubbles are in a bar of soap or how many miles are in the Mississippi River.
Right.
But you had to pass these tests to be eligible to vote. And so here you are, 1933, going forward. Now you have a right to vote, and it means something. So it gives you that sense of pride that maybe I cannot vote in a political election, but I can vote for these great ball players.
It's also notable that now Major League Baseball, at the time, the white baseball, now uses that kind of system. And not only because of the impact that it allowed fans to have on the voting system, but also, hey, it's kind of cool when other people have an impact on what's going on around, not just the journalists or the owners and all that. How important has it been for the Negro Leagues or for black players to have seen throughout history that they set the precedent for other things to happen in today's game?
Well, it's been a continual effort of Major League Baseball trying to copy a business model that was very successful.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just be honest. You talked about Gus Greenlee. He had, when he built his stadium in 1930, he had stadium lights installed in 1932. Some 5 years before, they had lights at Cincinnati's Crosley Field. They had numbers on the back of their jerseys. The Chicago American Giants put numbers on the back of their jerseys before the Yankees did the next year.
Mm-hmm.
We had divisional playoffs in the 20s, long before Major League Baseball did. We had interleague play starting in 1923. That didn't happen until probably 1997 in the major leagues.
Yep.
The Negro Leagues are more innovative and creative in doing things to attract their fan base. And it's right there in the history books that they had a good idea. I mean, I remember reading in the 20s about Ladies' Day.
Mm-hmm.
They said, we're going to let all the ladies in for free. The backstory is they wanted the women to come because that would cut down on profanity and drinking by the men.
Right.
And it worked. And eventually the women became fans. That doubled attendance.
Yeah.
And the men were better behaved.
Man, just by proxy, just by
Yes.
being in the same area.
Right.
That, like, I just think that's conducive to what we're talking about, like how everyone around each other brings out the best in them. When we
Yes.
talk about black baseball, we talk about black communities, we talk about black entrepreneurship, we talk about women and men in general.
Yes.
I think it's having the people around you that are going to uplift you and hold you to a higher standard,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's kind of what we're getting into about the Negro Leagues. And then we're talking about guys like John L. Clark
Oh, yes.
from the Pittsburgh Courier,
Mhm.
who was talking about how managers were buying their team's jerseys, as you were mentioning, and
Mhm.
bringing in facilities and but not doing scorecards and scorebooks and all these things, because what was that reasoning?
Well, it's kind of twinfold. Uh, it's difficult to have a consistent scoring system. What happened back then is the hometown team would score the game and send the results via telegram to the road team. And sometimes that data was mistranslated.
Mm.
And I can give you a more in-depth reason why that happened. It's very difficult to transmit data over using the telegraphs, and when they used the telephone, some of the names were misspelled
Right.
because they were taken phonetically and not correctly. And so that information is set to type.
Mm.
And when I was in high school, we had to learn how to type set, which means you had to learn how to read numbers and letters upside down and backwards. So when it hit the press, it would print correctly. And so right there is a built-in chance for errors when you're trying to read everything upside down and backwards, trying to set the type. And so there was not a big emphasis on statistics for that one reason, but another reason is if the players didn't know how well they did, they could not negotiate a better contract
Yep.
because their stats were not available.
Right. I think that's so interesting because of what we talk about, the destruction of the Negro Leagues because of the integration of baseball and how those kind of go hand in hand. And not a lot of people know that the integration of baseball kind of took away from the Negro Leagues, because not only were players going, but fans were, and communities were going. How much impact was that on the change of the landscape and obviously the end of the Negro Leagues as it was?
Very important. In covering the newspaper trail in 1947, we see Jackie Robinson going to the Dodgers, of course. Many of the sports writers for black newspapers wanted to see how this black man would perform in the all-white leagues. So you got the black newspaper, they only have one reporter.
Mm.
So he's going to the Dodgers game and not his hometown team's game.
Right.
So the Negro League team, hometown Negro League team, is getting less coverage. You know, and then a few weeks later, Larry Doby joins the Cleveland Indians in the American League, and you got this same phenomena happening. So in that first year, you got Willard Home Run Brown, Hank Thompson, and Dan Bankhead. Those 5 men going to the Negro Leagues in 1947, followed by Satchel Paige the following year in 1948. It was just less and less coverage because they wanted to see and report on how well Jackie Robinson and Larry Doby were doing. And it was only so much resource to go around when you only have one sports reporter.
Right.
So it's really interesting just to read the newspapers during that period. It's just, even in October, that one sports writer is covering college football. It is more popular than the World Series. College football is on page 1. World Series is on page 2.
That's crazy to think about. And also, obviously, in your book, you not only went through the games that you found most interesting, but also you gave the stories of these writers so that people could rehash how they were being written, how the stories were being told, the color, the environment, and how much was put into those things. And obviously, before the days of AI and all these things, you had to take all of the description from everything around you. How important was it for these black newspapers to be able to tell stories because they were one of one?
Well, that's very interesting, Ethan, because I tried to do an AI of all these stories, and I failed miserably because they use words and phrases and slang that I was not accustomed to, and I didn't want to lose the feel and the timbre of what they were actually saying. So I copied these articles verbatim and let the reader interpret, what that writer was trying to say.
Right.
Because I didn't want to lose the feel for that game and for that period. So I think it worked. I did write some summaries.
Yes.
Annual summaries year by year, so people would know where this country was at that period, at that time during the game. So it took many, many years to type up the stories and do reconstructed play-by-plays. I found financial statements for many of the games. I printed all the voting results for every game that I could find. And then I created a database to input the actual box scores into a database that would calculate individual batting averages and pitching ERAs, and then team batting averages and team pitching stats, which took a while. And of course, the ledger has the balance. For every walk, there has to be a base on ball.
Yeah.
And, for every run, there has to be a run given up by the pitcher.
Right.
And every time I would find a mistake, but using simple math, you can work through the problems.
And for those listening or watching at home that heard me say that there are some descriptions or some games, this is 500 pages worth of history. So you're not missing anything. But we did get into some of the statistical stuff and also going into the scorecards. But I wanted to ask you this. How much does that lack of consistency when it comes to record keeping or hurt the ability for today to tell the full statistical stories of the Negro League stars? And could some players even have a better reputation than we are even giving them?
Yes, it is possible, but mathematically we can usually figure out any math discrepancies. 9 players to play 9 innings, 27 outs, divided by 3 is 9. 9 is a prime number, and I can look at a box score today, and within 15 seconds, I can tell you who made the last out of that ball game without ever seeing that game,
Mm-hmm.
just by doing some simple math
Right.
based on looking at that box score. And the beauty of that is, once I figure out the last player who made the out, let's say it's the 6th batter, I know that batter 7th, 8th, and 9 had 1 less plate appearance. So I can work the game backwards and come back to the first batter and determine whether he batted 4 times or 5 times in the game. It's just math. And I got different math formulas for calculating earned runs, unearned runs. You put in hits, sacrifice hits rather, and sacrifice flies. They score differently, and hit by pitch. All those variables you have to work into your formula,
Right.
and you come up with a very solid box score.
So, how did you go about reconstructing the East-West box scores when it came to handling conflicting stats? Because, as we said, not everybody's gonna have the same box score or the same stat sheet or the same play-by-play either, and then also missing stats because it's been heard and been said that it's just difficult to find things when it comes to reconstructing these.
Well, fortunately, the East-West game was heavily documented. They published 4 box scores, first names. Most box scores do not have a first name, but the Defender and the Courier and the Kansas City Call had very extensive reporting of all the players, their first names, and the box scores are very solid. Your position is true for other box scores outside of the East-West game. But the East-West game was very well documented.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool. Obviously, getting into the journalistic portions of this, because we talked a little bit about how the integration of the game kind of changed how the Negro Leagues was perceived. In the 1930s, black newspapers were central to elevating player voices and challenging exclusion because not only the black newspapers, but also the New York Daily News was getting praise from the Pittsburgh Courier for questioning segregation in baseball. How important is it today for journalists to continue asking uncomfortable questions and holding power accountable?
It's very important. The black newspaper has become the voice of the voiceless. Mm-hmm. We may not have the political votes, we may not have the political power to voice our concerns, but we look at black newspapers like the Pittsburgh Courier. During the war years, Wendell Smith had a campaign called the Double V campaign, victory at home and victory abroad. Let's fight Nazism abroad and fight racism at home.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of took off. Some of the white newspapers took that theme. It says, why are we fighting Nazism abroad when we have racism at home that we're not even talking about? And he made them feel guilty that we got a double standard here.
Right.
It's all right in Nazi Germany, but we look the other way when it comes to racism in America. So writers like Wendell Smith, Sam Lacey, one of my favorite writers. I spent many hours in his apartment. An incredible man who, I think he lived to be about 99 and had a great memory, and game changer meeting him, to walk into his apartment and see photos of him with Jesse Owens, with Joe Louis, with Satchel Paige, with Jackie Robinson. He had all these Olympic tickets. He'd been to almost every Olympic and World Series and NFL championship game. They didn't have Super Bowl back then. But he'd been there. He had pictures and ticket stubs. I'm just blown away. He just such a treasure. But Sam Lacey is the boss. Him and Wendell Smith. And then you have a writer like Shirley Povich for the Washington Post, a great writer. Being a white man, he challenged the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
He would say, Jim Brown integrated the end zone today. He wouldn't say he scored a touchdown. That's how Shirley Povich would write.
Right. Yeah.
And Shirley was a he. Must clarify that. So, no, it's great reading these great sports writers and their take on how they take sports and do a political spin on what is happening in today's world.
How do you feel like journalism has changed over the years in that regard? When you talk about there are fewer journalists that are willing to challenge the status quo because of what it could mean for their career.
Well, yes, you start making a good salary and, you buy a home with 4 or 5 bedrooms and 2.5 baths and got a pool in the backyard, and you don't want to jeopardize the ability to drive that nice foreign car. So you tend to water down your editorials, trying to keep peace so you can pay the bills. I think in the heyday of writing, they didn't have that fear. They wasn't making enough money for you to take. It was just, they didn't work in a bubble. They just say, hey, here I am. This is the story, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's just, that's the truth, set you free.
When it comes to young journalists, even college journalists who are trying to or want to challenge the status quo or ask these tough questions, what would your advice be to them, even though their fear could be lack of access or losing access or trying to get their way up the social ladder and the career ladder and then being stopped because of that fear? What would you tell them, and how do you continue to push life into what they're going to do?
Well, I would tell any young writer to get to know your subject on a personal basis. You may not get to interact with him face to face the first time, but learn if he's married, unmarried, how many children he has, what is his background, how did he grow up, and you lead with those type of questions. I see you're from the projects in Pittsburgh.
Right.
I know somebody there, or I have that experience, and you make that personal connection. They feel more comfortable talking to you because of that connection, and they will open up, and you'll feel comfortable asking them those tough questions. I find that works for me. But I see you went to this college, HBCU, and oh yeah, and you served time in the Army. Oh, okay. Before I get to the real question.
Right. Butter them up a little bit.
Exactly. I want them to feel at ease that I've done my homework before I walked into the room.
I think it's a great point, because of you can't just dive into the tough questions. You got to throw, even though it might feel weird or seem weird, you got to throw 1 softball, 2 softballs up there for them to get a gauge on you're not trying to come at their career, especially athletes in today's era.
Right.
But it's more like you're coming to get information and tell the stories. As you said, a voice to the voiceless. It's one of my favorite phrases as a journalist, like especially before the age of when athletes had their own podcast and could talk about everything behind the scenes in their own right. I felt like journalists were the key for people to get the news, one, but also just to learn the stories of the people that they were following.
Oh yes, definitely, Ethan.
But we've talked about a couple of key figures in baseball, especially in black baseball. One that I think is still kind of not is touching the surface of how important he was, and how important he is to today's game specifically. But Kurt Flood, because of his impact in sacrificing his career, his health, to create an environment where the player had power. In today's MLB, in the previous years, how have you seen that come to fruition? And what did you see or hear about Kurt Flood and his journey to what he had to go through?
Well, growing up when Kurt Flood filed his lawsuit to eliminate the reserve clause, I thought it was newsworthy. I didn't know where it would go. Of course, he lost his case. He went all the way to the Supreme Court to eliminate the reserve clause. I think he is underrated, unheralded, and unappreciated for the work that he did to make it public that no player should be under a lifetime contract. No player should be controlled by what team they should play for and not have a voice on who they could be traded to. Today's ball player owes him a debt of gratitude for making that happen. Unfortunately, like many people, he did not get the support of his teammates, particularly black teammates who feared that they may lose that income source,
Right.
and lose that pool in the backyard.
Exactly.
So I think they regretted that later, because eventually Dave McNally and Andy Messersmith filed the same lawsuit and won it. And now we no longer have the reserve clause,
Right.
thanks to Kurt Flood, who, in my opinion, belongs in the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York.
I think that's a great point. And obviously, circling this back to today's game, in today's league, with increasing costs for the salary caps, MLB is the only league that doesn't. The NBA has a salary cap, the NFL has a salary cap, but Major League Baseball still does not have a salary cap, and in part due to what Kurt Flood was able to accomplish. Do you think we're at risk of slowly unraveling some of what Kurt Flood fought for?
I think so. We need to continue to have those discussions around Kurt Flood's agenda and how he suffered, dying, throat cancer, and the struggles he had with his marriage. I think it took a mental toll on him, and but it's not too late to honor his legacy.
Do you see players around the league now that you feel could carry on that spirit, that determination to keep what they've preserved thus far, challenging systems, even if it costs them public favor or some praise from their counterparts?
I think there's a few players, not many, who would step up and speak out. I don't know who they may be, but there are a few ball players. I think of Tony Clark, formerly of the Detroit Tigers, and met him, a very vocal advocate for fair play, and just a great guy. And of course, he's ridiculed by everybody because he's trying to do what is right.
And is there a player in today's league, and I'm thinking like Mookie Betts, is he someone that you could see kind of coming up and taking on that spirit and being an unwavering voice for the black community?
Yes, I do. I'm a big Mookie Betts fan. He speaks out on subjects. He spoke out a lot during the George Floyd murder. He has a voice, and people do listen. Of course, he's an outstanding ball player. But no, he has been very instrumental in promoting black equality in the league and off the field.
And we've talked a lot about just the overall league as it stands today. CeCe Sabathia now being into the National Hall of Fame, a one and done first ballot Hall of Famer. How important is it for representation throughout the youth communities, especially, to see a player like CeCe Sabathia make it in and have a goal and a belief that one day that could be them if they do X, Y, and Z?
Well, CC Sabathia is a great role model.
Mm.
Talked to him on a few occasions, and a very positive man who had to overcome alcoholism.
Mm-hmm.
Very candid about his ability and how great he could have been without those demons. And he also helps promote the Negro Leagues. He saw a picture of the 1946 Satchel Paige All-Stars coming off their plane, and that blew him away that black men had their own plane in 1946 to travel the country to play white All-Star teams. So he's not shy about knowing his history and sharing it with other people.
Guys like, I remember from a few National Association of Black Journalists national conventions ago in Birmingham, Alabama, when we had the Rickwood Field when we were over there. CeCe Sabathia made an appearance, Ryan Howard as well, Harold Reynolds, guys that are continuing to push the game forward, even though they are no longer playing.
Right.
I think that's one of the biggest things, especially when we talk about the youth communities, is showcasing how the game doesn't have to end, even though your playing days does.
Right.
And I think you are also a great example of that, because even though you couldn't learn to hit the curveball, you still have made a huge impact
Yes.
on today's history and how it is continued to be preserved. When you look at the broadcasters, when you look at the storytellers, the historians like yourself, how have they become more important off the field when it comes to the black community?
Oh, well, they're more engaged in what they're trying to do, more contributions to nonprofits. They tend to show up more at local community events, and I think this is a movement in the right direction.
And when you talk about the MLB statistics now, over the last couple of years, Major League Baseball is now incorporating Negro League stats, and we're getting a better idea of how great these players are. Josh Gibson being atop some of these leaderboards because of what he was able to accomplish during the Negro Leagues. What does that recognition mean to you as a historian who spent decades reconstructing this legacy by hand?
It means a great deal to me in that we're finally recognizing the greatness of these black ball players, not through embellished truths or exaggerated narratives, but now we can quantify their ability through statistics. Numbers don't lie. I think this is a form of social reparations, in that now we have statistics to justify why we think Josh Gibson is one of the greatest hitters ever. He has one of the highest OPS averages ever.
Right.
Career batting averages. He's on top of the leaderboard. You got great statistics for Satchel Paige and Hilton Smith and so many others. The stats really validate what you thought you knew,
Right.
based on oral history. Now it is the real deal, and it makes for good barroom talk, or get into a good argument at the pool hall or juke joint, wherever you go. And you can always use stats to justify your position.
Right. So,
You know, he won 3 championships. My man won 4. So, but that's the beauty of it. I just call it social reparations. Stats can be very powerful.
that's the saying, though, isn't it? Men lie, women lie, stats don't. I've heard that a few times in my lifetime.
Well, yeah. Yeah, okay.
But when we talk about today's league, and obviously the stats being implemented
Uh-huh.
is a small step, and it cannot be the last step. If we fail to preserve this history properly, what's at stake for our understanding of American sports and cultures?
Well, I think the history will always be preserved. We cannot take it out of the history books anymore. We can burn these books like they did in Nazi Germany, but now we're in the digital age. All my books are in the cloud or they're on a thumb drive in my safe.
Right.
So you can burn all my books you want, but my kids will reprint them or send them out over the internet for other people to read. So that's just a wasted effort by the current administration to destroy our history or anyone's history. We're in a digital age now, so just bring it on. That's what I say.
In a recent conversation that you had earlier this week, you said one of the things that you hoped that Major League Baseball could do to take the next step would be the stadiums flying Negro League World Series flags, and including the Cleveland Buckeyes in the state of Cleveland. Why is that something that you think is so prominent or so necessary when it comes to the development and continuation of the elevation of these teams?
Well, some people are visual learners. When they walk into the progressive field, as it's called today, it would be nice to have a championship flag, World Series championship flag of the 1945 Cleveland Buckeyes. For the simple reason the Cleveland Buckeyes are considered a major league team.
Right.
So why doesn't the city of Cleveland recognize them? This is a low maintenance effort. You just put a flag up a pole in the outfield, and people will come in and say, "What does that flag represent?" Well, I'm so glad you asked. Let me tell you about the Cleveland Buckeyes.
Yep.
And we could go on to New York Cubans in 1947, Newark Eagles 46, Kansas City Monarchs, they won the World Series in 24 and 42. Chicago American Giants won it in 26 and 27. Now the Chicago White Sox they did listen to me, and they did put a flag up in center field with the Chicago American Giants.
Right.
Chicago Cubs did not. But I continue my efforts. You know, they cannot fire me, so I have nothing to lose but just to make waves and create controversy.
My last question for you, and
Okay.
again, Mr. Larry Lester, what's one story, player, or lesson that you wish more people truly understood about Black baseball history?
I want people to understand that Black baseball was a product of segregated America. Without systemic racism, the Black Leagues would have never existed. And through that existence, we have learned that Black people can start a business, make it sustainable, and make it very successful. That's the beauty of studying Black baseball history. I mean, we power-driven and drove hair salons, insurance businesses, restaurants, haberdashers, cab companies, all are byproducts of this Black baseball machine, Black baseball enterprise. So it is, that's Black business was rampant, just full of success stories until integration.
Until integration. Ironic enough, right?
Yes.
It's crazy to think about it that way. But again, Larry Lester, thank you so much for joining me today, Ethan Sands, on today's show. And I implore everybody watching at home or listening at home to go purchase one of Larry Lester's many books where you can learn more about Black baseball, the history of the Negro Leagues, and educate yourselves on how Major League Baseball is still being affected and impacted by these players and by the history of the game itself.
Thank you, Ethan, for having me.
Sir?